Hey guys, welcome back to the Fanfic Reread Project. In this episode, we will be continuing our reread of Lego Story. Right now, we are going to jump into Chapter 4. The storm continued to rage on as they were taken not to the helicarrier, but the Avengers Mansion. The large building was dark when they rolled up the drive. The pounding rain managed to soak them again in the short walk from the truck to the front door. Natasha had to wring out her hair on the doormat. A flash of lightning illuminated the two grand staircases that swept up from the foyer to the balcony. "Looks like we're the only ones here," Natasha said. She hit the lights and the crystals of the chandelier cast faint little rainbows on the white marble floors. The sound of the rain pouring against the roof echoed through the big room. Cat must be working late. Clint shook his head and Natasha shot him a look when he got her wet again. "Sorry. I'm gonna go dry off," she told him as she moved toward the stairs. "You do that." This is a weird note, and not to stop literally 4 lines in, but it's weird that I note that when Natasha turns on the light, the little rainbows cast by the crystals of the chandelier. Why that detail? Instead of literally anything else about the room. We did get the color of the floors and stuff, but that seems like a very strange detail to add in here. I think it's just because this scene is not really focused on, showing you the beauty of Avengers Mansion. It's just about how empty it is. So that seems like a strange detail, but it's kind of nothing, so let's move on. Since Steve seemed to be the only person living there at the moment, the other 9 bedrooms were free. She ducked into one of them and turned on the lights. It had an antiquated style. Streamlined lines and white and pale gray traveled in thin curves and sharp angles over walls in seafoam green. Those lines continued into the bathroom, where they traveled over the edges of the mirrors that covered every wall. The furniture was unused and the bed neatly made. It was almost like no one had stepped inside since the 1930s. Stepping into the bathroom was the first time she'd seen herself in a mirror since she left the helicarrier. She'd forgotten that she was even wearing makeup. The rain had caused it to become smudged and gave her raccoon eyes. She just decided to jump in the shower since no one was there yet. It felt good to wash off all the work they'd done that day, especially after the Oscorp incident. Again, I feel a little weird about the detail about what the room looks like. Yes, describing the way the room looks totally makes sense, but emphasizing that it's weird, this room kind of looks old and antiquated. I don't know, they just feel like really weird details to be dropping that have no relevance to what we're doing. There was a knock on the bedroom door as she stepped out. "Hey, Nat, I thought you were supposed to be getting dry." She grabbed a towel and then poked her head out of the door so she could hear him better. "What's up?" "Sitwell is here," he told her. "Sitwell?" "Yeah. Come down to the round table for the briefing." Somehow it had slipped her mind that she didn't live there, so she didn't exactly have any clothes to change into. She toweled her hair until it stopped dripping, put back on the tank top she had on under her suit, and then snagged a pair of sweatpants from Steve's room. She went down the stairs at the back of the house, which came out right beside the assembly room. Jasper stood at the head of the room, in front of the giant screen. Clint gave her a look as she walked in. "Agent Sitwell," she said with a nod. You know what? I just realized that is kind of weird because Tasha just walked in sweatpants and a tank top. She has no problem. And her coworker is there. And with Clint, it's not weird because Clint's also her friend, or even Steve and Tony and all those people, because those people are her friends as well as her quote unquote coworkers. But Agent Sitwell. "Romanoff, sorry it took so long to get this to you," he said as he slid her phone to her across the table. "Now, first things first. Fury wants a report on the situation at the gym." "We already spoke to Coulson about that," she told him. "Coulson hasn't been back to the helicarrier since Grand Central," he said. "It's been a long day." "You're telling me," Clint said with a sigh. Why couldn't Coulson just call them? That's a weird thing to say. "Oh, Coulson hasn't been back to the helicarrier." Number one, they told Coulson what happened over their earpieces. So it's not did I forget they lived in 2014, 12, 13, whatever? They had phones. So why couldn't Coulson just call them or have someone else relay the message who was actually going back to the helicarrier the way that they're about to tell Sitwell? I'm confused about that. Either way, a mutant named Fred Dukes, who also goes by the Blob, had taken up quote-unquote residence in the building's basement. We weren't able to apprehend him ourselves, but it was taken care of. That's what we spoke to Coulson about. We also found these at the scene. He reached into his pockets and pulled out the pieces of shrapnel Natasha had asked him to hold. "Excuse the very loud bugs outside. I have the window open because it's not 1 billion degrees outside today." This one came from a generator and might be nothing, Natasha said, pointing to the piece of plastic, but this, she tapped her finger against the glass, this came from a tank. She slid it to Jasper, who picked it up and inspected the logo on it. He had a few of these down there, some broken before we got there, but all of them were empty. You think he was working for Goblin? Sitwell asked her. Or holding something for him, at the very least. Jean Grey was with us. She said he never worked for anyone but Magneto. Clint shrugged. Considering where we were before we got there, though, I'm willing to bet it wasn't a coincidence. Sitwell looked down. Fury is not going to like the sound of that. At least he won't be able to get into whatever's going on. Speaking of that, he stopped to take a breath before he said it. We're in the process of investigating a break-in at the raft. The raft? Clint repeated in disbelief. Wait, a break-in? Jasper nodded. A break-in that would end in a breakout. Who would want to break into the raft? Natasha asked. Sabretooth is the only face we've been able to identify for sure, but he couldn't do it alone. There are a lot of names floating around for his accomplice. The leader, Whiplash, some guy who calls himself the Mandarin, but the one I've heard the most is Mystique. Due to her unique abilities, though, it's been hard to tell. Actually, if it is her, she's probably the mastermind. Who were they trying to get out? Clint asked. Magneto is the most logical answer, and maybe a number of other dangerous mutants that follow him. We have Stark and Banner on the scene, and it seems Charles Xavier has sent Wolverine to investigate as well. Natasha sat up. Wait, didn't Duke say something about this? She asked Clint. Did he? She snapped her fingers. Yeah, he thought we were going to take him there, and he said he didn't care because he wouldn't be there long, Clint finished. Jean did say he had worked for Magneto. What does Fury want to do? Natasha asked Jasper. Right now we're focusing on containment. There are a lot of other bad people in there, and we don't want this to spread. He reached under the table and pulled out 2 duffel bags. However, you two have the rest of the night off. We'll keep you posted. He gave both of them a nod before stepping out of the room. Clint got up and opened his. You think there's any connection between what we were doing earlier? I hope not, she said, but I'm not about to rule it out. Did they send people to our houses to pack these? He asked as he looked through the bag. I already had mine packed, Nat told him. For what? She shrugged. Whatever. He laughed. Of course. See you tomorrow, I guess. She picked up her own bag and returned upstairs. At least now she wouldn't have to keep wearing Steve's clothes. She finished drying her hair before she lied down in the bed and checked her messages. There was nothing of note. The calming storm lulled her off to sleep. So, briefly, I wanted to say that there is some stuff in here that's kind of weird. The fact that Sitwell says, well, right now you guys have the night off. I talked about this in another episode, so I'm not gonna, spend a lot of time on it. But the fact that everything in this just happens so rapidly is a little bit weird. And I did say before that it also kind of ruins the suspense of figuring out that this is connected. But even beyond that, it messes up the pacing of the book. But anyway, the sun was blazing through the window as she rolled out of bed the next day. She didn't really realize how soft the bed was before. When she sat up, she felt herself sink down into the mattress. Her body was loose, a little too loose, and she actually had to stretch to tighten herself back up. After that, she got up and started to brush out her hair, and there was another knock at the door. Something happened? She asked Clint. Nah, just wanted to tell you that Steve made breakfast, he said. What are you going to tell him about where his clothes got to? She narrowed her eyes. He won't know if you don't tell him. Before I go to the next page, I wanted to note that the part where Natasha has to stretch to get herself unloose, whatever that means, there's actually a moment like that in the last edit of the Hunger Games that we're going to be reading. I think Katniss has to do a similar thing because the bed on the train or something like that is really soft. We can talk about that more, but I'm pretty sure I carried that over specifically from this. He just laughed. Those pants fit you surprisingly well. Steve has the shoulder-to-the-waist ratio of a tortilla chip, she said offhandedly. He raised an eyebrow. I'm gonna go get dressed. He nodded and closed the door behind her. I wish I had indicated that Natasha had answered the door because I thought she was talking to Clint through the door. But then he was like, those pants fit you surprisingly well. And I was like, what? When she came downstairs, she was dressed for work. Cargo pants, tank top, leather jacket, and boots, all black, and her hair in a Katniss braid. Oh wow, speak of the devil. The smell of bacon and eggs wafted out of the kitchen and into the hall. The plates were already made when she walked in. I don't know how you do this, Clint said after taking a bite of his pancake. I swear you didn't get in until 2 a.m. How come? She asked as she sat down. Before we get into this, I wanted to note that it's really weird that this turns into sort of like a semi-domestic fanfic before going back into a actual retelling, quote unquote, of the events of the games. This chapter is the first chapter where Natasha's like, oh, I was wearing like her inner monologue, like she was wearing makeup, and then tells us what her clothes look like. Not a single other chapter ever mentioned any of that, except like that time her hair length was mentioned to show how long it had been since the Avengers happened. And now they're sitting down and Steve's cooking breakfast, and this is all kind of like weird, honestly. But anyway, there was a break-in at Tony's place last night, Steve told them as he poured her a glass of orange juice. Who by? She asked. He leaned back against the counter. A man called Aldrich Killian and a guy who calls himself the Mandarin. Both of those names are much more familiar than I'd like to admit, Clint said. Why? Where'd you hear them? Because I'm still not clear on who either of them are. The Mandarin came up last night while Agent Sitwell was briefing us on the situation at the raft, she explained. He is mentioned in passing. I don't know who he is either. Aldrich Killian is the owner of a private think tank called AIM. She turned to Clint. Does that stand for something? Advanced Idea Mechanics, I think? Apparently he and Tony used to know each other, Steve told them. They met at some place or other back in the 90s. Tony could barely remember who he was, especially after he started breathing fire. Clint looked up at him. What? Steve shook his head. He wasn't very happy about Tony forgetting him. Sorry. That's not funny. But they didn't break in just so this guy could breathe fire at Tony for something that happened 13 or so years ago, Natasha said after she swallowed her eggs. They wanted one of Tony's arc reactors, but that's the thing. We got both of those guys before they could even get off the roof, but one of the reactors is still missing. That was strange. Did they pass it off to someone, Clint asked. Last time I checked in with Tony, he was reviewing his security footage, and it was only those two. They didn't even have henchmen. There was no one else there. No one you could see, Natasha finished. I thought about that too, Steve agreed, but the only invisible person I know of is Susan Storm, and that just doesn't make sense. Of course not, but there are a few people who can hide themselves like that. She bit off a piece of bacon in between sentences. If what we heard about what happened at the raft is true, it could be Magneto even. Her phone started to vibrate in her pocket. I don't want to jump to conclusions about something like that, though. Hello? So... Number one, this entire conversation is rendered kind of completely useless by the fact that we're going to go over this situation once again in the briefing that's coming up, because yes, there is another briefing in this chapter. Jesus Christ. So we just talked about the fact that Natasha and Clint, quote unquote, had the night off after doing 2 missions back to back during a day where S.H.I.E.L.D. had to deal with 5 separate situations. Well, actually, no, it was 4 situations. The Baxter Building thing wasn't actually like a S.H.I.E.L.D. thing. That was the only thing that S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't actually like sanction people to go and deal with the situation. So you have all these people, it's supposed to be, from the looks of Steve getting sent back when Natasha and Clint went to go on their mission, being cycled around into different missions. But Tony, who, I remind you, got shot out of the sky by a helicopter at the beginning of the previous day, has been to 2 separate missions. Like, why do they keep doing this? Let this man sit down. I don't get it. I think what it is the believability factor for me personally, because this is supposed to be and as you'll see, because it's not supposed to be super realistic. I mean, clearly, because it's a superhero-based thing, it can only be so realistic. But it's clearly meant to be more realistic than what actually happened in the game. When we get to Chapter 5, you'll see that the events of that chapter are changed completely, because what actually happens in Level 6 of the game, which is what that's based on, makes no sense at all. But doing that kind of stuff begs the question of what is considered realistic in this and what isn't. So when you have like me changing the entire events of a level so that it makes quote unquote more sense in the universe based off of the MCU, but then you have other places where like characters aren't given a break, or characters who are clearly injured in other parts of the story are just suddenly back on their feet without any periods of rest at all. Mind you, again, the shit that happened at Grand Central Station, Tony was sent to that by S.H.I.E.L.D. He didn't just happen to go there because his house is like literally right behind Grand Central Station. Like, that kind of beggars belief. I think that's what it is. And when you add the pacing on top of that, it really makes you question, like, well, why did you even go to the lengths you did to make this seem more realistic if you weren't going to do it with this and this as well, you know? It's all about the consistency of these types of changes, but I guess it's whatever now. So let's move on. She was answered by loud static buzzing, which was followed by loud screeching that forced her to pull the phone away from her ear. Her screen began to glitch out, twisting the image into a pixelated mess. Something wrong? Steve asked her as he started on the dishes. She squinted down at the screen. Underneath all of the constantly shifting blocks of random color, she could just make out something like an icon, a skull with 6 tentacles curling underneath it. It looked incredibly familiar, but she couldn't place a name to it. Okay, I'm sorry, that's absolutely unrealistic. There's no way that a SHIELD agent wouldn't know the symbol of Hydra. Absolutely not. Nope. This always gets me. Like, I have a lot of problems with this story. Anyway, moving on. She turned the screen to face him. Do you know what that is? He squinted at it and started to shake his head, but then he dropped the glass in his hand, which thankfully landed in the sink. I'm going to take that as a yes. Why is the Hydra symbol on your phone? He asked, eyes wide. I don't know. It just showed up. She pushed a few buttons, but the screen didn't change, and it won't go away. Is someone trying to hack my phone? Then Clint's phone vibrated. You too? No, it's Fury. He wants us in the briefing room now. He got up from the table. He's definitely going to want to see that. You know what? I also noticed that throughout this story, there is a criminal lack of, like, reaction to certain things happening. Tony gets shot out of the sky by a helicopter, and everyone's just like, who did it? And no one's like, is he okay? Oh my god, you know? Natasha's phone is seemingly getting hacked by Hydra, and the only person who seems even a little bit shocked is Steve. Tony's house gets broken into, and Natasha's just like, oh my gosh, who did it? Not even like, what the fuck, is Tony okay? Because apparently no one cares if Tony is okay. Oh, Jesus. But I just kept noticing that these things would happen to people that these characters are supposed to care about. Like, they're supposed to all be friends. They're literally all sitting and sleeping over in Tony's house right now. And yet, like, none of them has anything close to, like, a friend-like reaction to hearing that something happened to their friend. Anyway, all three of them walked into the room expecting to talk via the screen, but instead Director Fury was there in person. He wasn't alone either. Tony and Bruce were with him as well. How did they all get in without us noticing? Clint whispered toward her. Back door, Tony answered. You do know I used to live here, right? Everybody down, Fury said, tapping the table. We've got a lot to talk about. We do, Natasha agreed, but I think you should see this first. She moved around the table and gave the phone to him. What is it? Bruce asked. The Hydra symbol. I think it's a virus, and considering their reputation, I have reason to believe they might be hacking it, or trying to. It's my personal though, so if they are, they won't find anything of interest. Wait. Hydra? Tony said. Like from World War II Hydra? The guys who were too weird for Hitler Hydra? He turned to Steve. I thought you took care of that. So did I, Steve said back. Hydra died with the Red Skull. Why the hell would they suddenly show back up now? Cut off one head, grow 2 more, Fury muttered, reciting Hydra's mantra. Maybe it isn't as sudden as you think. I'd love to say it was just copycats trying to keep the dream alive, but since it's Agent Romanoff's phone, this is probably beyond that. I'm gonna have to take this back to the helicarrier so someone can look at it. She nodded and took a seat between Clint and Tony. Now that we've covered that, I'm gonna go down the list in ascending order of threat level. We were able to track the energy signature to the arc reactor taken from Stark Tower last night. Tony raised an eyebrow. You're tracking my arc reactors? As often as you move between houses and as often as they get blown up, we got into the habit of it just to make sure nothing's happened to you, Fury told him. That does not excuse what he did, but at least the excuse is funny. Whew. So, just to note, does anyone else in the story not realize how weird it is that Natasha left her phone on the helicarrier? She gets it back from Sitwell, who clearly told Clint that he had the phone, and then very suddenly it starts having like a Hydra virus thing on it. A little weird, don't you think? Like, no one thinks like that's kind of strange. Like, I was about to say, isn't it weird that he never gave the phone back to Coulson? But did Coulson not go back to the helicarrier after fucking, what was it called? The incident at Grand Central Station. Has he literally just been out? And this is going to cycle back into the whole thing of like, well, who gets to take breaks during the day and who doesn't? Like, what the? Goodness gracious. Anyway, it's just surprising that no one realized that. Well, also, I do want to note that hacking is like a remote activity, so you don't have to physically have the computer or whatever you're trying to hack into. But it's just weird. I think it's weird. But anyway. Well, I appreciate the sentiment, I guess. Where is it? Tony said that. The Empire State Building. Tony squinted at him. What? That's what we're trying to figure out. Most of the time people want your reactors is because they want to power something with it, and I highly doubt that that thing is the building itself. Are you suggesting that someone is hiding a doomsday device in a national landmark, Steve asked? I'm not about to suggest that the Empire State Realty Trust is so desperate to go green that they resort to stealing a power source from someone. Something is going on down there, and we need to figure out what it is. And this is the least pressing thing on your list? Tony asked. Yes, Fury said plainly. My god. Next order of business. One of the bricks we were tracking got picked up by the same helicopter. Jesus. Holla. One of the bricks we were tracking got picked up by the same helicopter that shot down our sky surfer yesterday morning. Turns out our nobody does work for somebody, and that somebody is Dr. Doom. They landed at Castle Doom this morning. So he's the one who wanted the sky surfer out of the sky, Bruce asked. And he's the one who sent the Abomination and Sandman to Grand Central to get that brick. Further investigation has revealed that Doom is in possession of several cosmic bricks at the moment. But what does he want them for, Steve said. Probably some big device he can use to take over the world, Tony told him. Between me, Richards, and Banner here, we found out that the bricks emanate large amounts of an energy called the power cosmic. Power cosmic? Steve repeated curiously. The name is more self-explanatory than you think, Bruce said. It can't be wielded or used as an energy source itself, but Richards thinks that it has the ability to enhance the properties of other cosmic artifacts in its vicinity, like Thor's hammer. Or the Tesseract, Tony added. But the Tesseract isn't even on Earth anymore, Natasha said. That leads to the third point. The raft has been sunk. Between the bluntness of the delivery and the sheer weight of the news, they were all taken aback, and there was a brief moment of silence before Fury continued on. Sabretooth and Mystique initiated a breakout that freed all of the maximum security inmates. She leaned forward. All of them? All of them, he repeated. Thanks to Stark and Banner, we were able to get the leader, Abomination, and Whiplash back, and we caught Sabretooth, but everyone else was able to get out of Dodge before we could send in reinforcements. What does that have to do with the Tesseract? Clint asked. Loki used an arc reactor to power the portal that he used to get the Chitauri to Earth, Tony told him, at least until the Tesseract took over. That explains your mystery third party from last night, Natasha said to Tony and Steve at the same time. But he still doesn't have the Tesseract to use it, Bruce countered. It's just like you said, Natasha. It's in Asgard. He doesn't need to physically have it to use it, Clint said. They all looked at him. The Tesseract is a door to another point in space, and doors open from both ends, Fury finished with a nod. When Loki came to Earth last year, he used the Tesseract even though it was already here, in our custody at the Pegasus facility, Clint explained to them. You can use it to get someplace else from where it is, and to come from someplace else to get to where it is. Doors open at both ends, he repeated. So that means that he might be able to access it remotely in Asgard and use it to leave Earth, Fury finished. Might? Steve asked. Why might? We haven't been privy to the Cube's new living arrangements. He might be able to access it, but he might not. The Asgardians haven't exactly been keeping in touch with us. We're getting in contact with Dr. Jane Foster to make sure there aren't any other ways he could get back and forth, just to be safe. He placed both of his hands on the table and looked over all of them. With Loki alone, we could be looking at another level 7, and we still don't know what Magneto or Dr. Doom are up to. Ladies and gentlemen, we have officially reached critical mass. We're assembling, Steve said. Fury nodded. I'm looking to put together a team for a possible operation to infiltrate Latveria, and we're working with Charles Xavier to find out what the Brotherhood might be planning. There's no way to find out if Thor knows what happened, so for now we're going to have to go ahead without him. As of right now, I want you two down at the Empire State Building, he said to Natasha and Clint. If Loki is trying to get off of this planet, we need to know about it. The rest of you stand by. You'll have your orders soon enough. He gave them a nod, and then he stepped out. You know, maybe we should have taken Thor up on his offer to lock up Loki in Asgard, Bruce said once the door shut. It would have made things a lot easier on us. Wasn't exactly an offer, Tony said back. Don't know how they got him to let him keep him here. He's not going to be happy to hear about this, Steve added. We'd love to stay and chat, but we should get going, Natasha said as she rose from the table. Gotta see about that arc reactor. Tony pulled a set of keys out of his pocket and threw them to her. What are these for? The car. Try to bring it back in one piece, please. I haven't gotten to use it yet. The car turned out to be a Lamborghini Aventador, new, sleek, and black down to the rims. The backlighted dashboard looked more like it belonged in the cockpit of a plane. Why does he keep this here? Clint asked as he got inside. He ran his hand over the soft leather of his seat in admiration as the garage door rolled up. He doesn't even live here. Maybe he ran out of room in his other garage, Natasha suggested. Which one? He asked with a smirk. The one under Stark Tower or the one across the yard? She laughed as she stuck the key in the ignition. Clint gave a start as the engine purred. Don't get too wild, he warned. She readjusted her gauntlets and then put the car into drive. Just put on your seatbelt, Barton. And that's the end of that chapter. Whew, my head hurts. So, my big issue with this chapter is not even that nothing happens, because this is an important chapter where we learn a lot of shit about what's happening. My problem is that this chapter is indicative of the big problem with this story, which is the fact that Clint and Natasha are clearly not the central characters of what's going on. And so, as a result of that, we have to have large portions of the story devoted to catching both them and the audience up to what's happening everywhere else. The fact that there are 2 briefings in this chapter is unforgivable in and of itself. However, in isolation, both briefings do make sense. Like, if you look at it from a Watsonian standpoint, which is the in-universe standpoint, it makes sense that Fury would send someone down to the mansion to brief Natasha and Clint on everything before they retired for the night. Totally makes sense, especially because they weren't around for the whole raft thing, and when Coulson told them about it, things were still developing. The briefing that we just read through totally makes sense, because these characters haven't been in the same room with each other ever. The last time we saw most of them together was in chapter 1, and Bruce very patently wasn't there because he was still the Hulk. So they haven't been able to catch up on everything that's been happening to everybody else at all. So it makes sense that Fury would gather his main Avengers together and brief them on everything that's happening so far. My problem is that if you look at it from a Doyleist standpoint, these briefings are not just about catching all the characters up on everything that's been happening. It's about catching the audience up on what should be the main plot of this fucking story. You know what I mean? Like, there is no reason why the audience should be finding out about the breakout at the raft via a briefing with Agent Sitwell and these 2 characters. They should be seeing that happen on screen. Same thing with Natasha and Clint talking to Steve about what happened at Tony's house. We should have seen that happen. Especially because that's based off of a literal level from the actual video game, you know? Anything that compromises a main level in the video game should have been shown on the page. End of discussion. Like, you can still have briefings showing people talking about certain things because, again, there's always going to be one group of people or a few groups of people who are not going to be present for something. So having a briefing where they all get together and talk about, like, the power cosmic, that's totally fine because that's not something that would have been really discussed on screen before this point, not in full. Even, like, going all the way back to the beginning of the story, the briefing where Natasha and Clint learn about what happened to Tony makes sense because no one else knew about that except Maria and Fury, you know? There are briefings that make sense, but the problem is the point of these briefings is not to update the characters and relay information we don't already know. It's about telling you about what is supposed to be the main plot of this story. We should not be learning about the inciting incident of this story secondhand from Director Fury. Like, absolutely not. We should not be learning about the breakout at the raft secondhand from Agent Sitwell. We should not be learning about the break-in at Tony's house secondhand from Steve. This is my main problem with this story. In my desire to have a female main character, who was apparently the only main character for some reason, I ended up excluding large portions of the main plot of the story from the actual POV because she's just not around for all that stuff. And that's problematic in what's supposed to be an adaptation of the game, and becomes even more problematic when you remember that I had other things that I wanted to do with this story that I needed to set up for the sequel, but specifically without the characters of Tony Stark and Jean Grey, as well as a bunch of other characters actually in the, like, spotlight, how would I even set that shit up? And I think this is where like Lego Story ended up going off of the rails, because my original point in having that second story that was supposed to be all about the drama that developed behind the scenes that we didn't really hear about in the first story, I wasn't even able to do that because I was too busy focusing on, well, I want a female POV character, and then choosing the one female character who literally was present for only like 2% of the game. It boggles my mind, and I understand why I wanted that, especially because the majority of characters in Lego Marvel Superheroes are male, especially the people who show up the most throughout the game. But it's weird to focus just on Natasha when not only are there other female characters, there aren't that many, but like Jean Grey and Storm and Susan Storm are all playable characters during the game. So you could easily like insert them as POVs as well, and then also have some dudes. That's what I don't get, is why I didn't do a cycling POV so we could see more perspectives instead of just focusing on this one character who at best was kind of a side character in the game. And this chapter really shows that by just the sheer amount of information. 99.9% of this chapter is just info dumping. Info dumping described as briefings and characters just talking to each other. And it's ridiculous, honestly. The other reason it bothers me so much is because this had the potential to actually be a good story that did what it was supposed to do regarding setting up the sequel with the drama and shit. But I ended up not doing that because I wanted to focus on this one character who at best should have been like a secondary character who had her own subplots and stuff. Because like, the thing about this is that it does show that you can give Clint and Natasha shit to do throughout the story, but this is not the primary shit that we should be focusing on. Not for most of it anyway. You know, they should be side missions, literally, in some cases. But anyway, so we are going to move on now to chapter 5. I have decided that this is going to be the last chapter we're going to read. Number one, because we are already almost 40 minutes into this, and this chapter is pretty long, so this episode is going to be pretty lengthy as it is. Also, I remembered that I actually have an outline of the story saved, so I can tell you guys not only what is supposed to happen throughout the rest of this very briefly, but describe the sequel more in depth in the next episode after we read what there is of chapter 6. So that's what I'm going to do. So anyway, chapter 5. The car drove like an absolute dream, and they got uptown in no time at all. The Empire State Building towered above them in the clear morning sky when they exited the parking. The Empire State Building towered above them in the clear morning sky when they exited the parking. What is wrong with my mouth? It's a parking garage, not a parketing garage. What's parketing? The Empire State Building towered above them in the clear morning sky when they exited the parking garage. The letters on the front of the building shined in gold. Something doesn't seem right about this, Clint said with a shake of the head as they crossed the street. If it's a portal like they think, how did they get it in here? Who does Loki know that could pull those kinds of strings? Natasha shrugged. I'm not sure. Was he in solitary, she asked as she put on her gloves, because if he wasn't, he could have met some people who know some people. Maybe, he agreed tentatively. She reached out and opened the door, but a guard came and grabbed it. I'm sorry, we're closed. Closed? She repeated. The guard smiled apologetically. Sorry about the inconvenience. He pulled the handle out of her hand and started to close the door again, but then Clint grabbed it. Why? Clint asked. What's up? The smallest bit of nervousness passed over his face before he answered them. We're having some technical problems. Clint and Natasha looked at each other, but then the sound of yelling traveled toward them through the lobby. Doesn't sound very technical, Clint said curiously. The guard's eyes widened and a whooshing sound behind him, and Natasha felt a sudden influx of heat. The guard turned, but someone punched him in the face. When he slumped to the ground, they saw Johnny Storm standing behind him. Clint smirked. Hey, little Steve. Oh, no. Johnny rolled his eyes. Whatever. He shook the flame off of his other hand. Took you guys long enough to get here. Had enough time to clear the way. You were expecting us? Natasha asked as they stepped through the door. How did you find out about the arc reactor? We get briefed too, you know, he informed them. Maria told us everything on Fury's behalf. He did say we were assembling, Clint said to her with a shrug. Now that the gang's all here, you two wouldn't happen to know where we could start looking, do you? Johnny asked. This place is huge. Well, if what Fury suspects about a portal is true, it won't be just anywhere. Johnny looked surprised. He thinks Loki is using an arc reactor to build a portal, Clint explained. Natasha started to wander through the massive space as he did. Maybe it's under the building. Like in the basement? Johnny asked. Wouldn't that still be in plain sight? Not if it's hidden, he countered. It could be inaccessible to most of the elevators and the stairs, so no one can wander down there. So how do we get into a secret basement? Natasha stopped in front of the tall mural at the back of the hall, a relief of the building in shining metal over gold and stone etched with a map of the Northeast. There was something a little off about it, though. A golden circle that marked the city rested higher than the other parts. It looked like it was just waiting to be pushed. "Hey," she said, snapping her fingers at the boys behind her. "Lock that door. I think I may have found our way into your quote-unquote secret basement." Okay, so let me pause right here because I'm realizing that something that happened in an earlier chapter is a trick that I've used multiple times now. So, do you remember back in chapter 4 when they fell into the, or is that chapter 3? Chapter 3, excuse me, I'm all over the place with these chapters. Anyway, when Fred Dukes cracked the floor and somehow that sent them all the way into the storm drains, Clint and Natasha were going back and forth trying to figure out how to get out of the storm drains, and then Jean was like, wait, I know what to do. And that moment is really similar to what we just read with Johnny and Clint talking about where this machine might be, and then Natasha actually searching the room. So I didn't realize that this was like a thing that I was consciously doing and not just a moment for characters to have like useless conversation with each other. I don't know what it's supposed to like mean or if it means anything or if it's just a cute thing that I did while characters do a thing. But hey, at least there was intention behind it. As soon as she heard the click, she rose up on her tiptoes and pushed the circle. It sunk back into the picture like a button. There was a rumble as the mural itself started to recede, and then it slid sideways and into the wall. It revealed an old elevator whose doors opened on their own. She heard Johnny laugh behind her. Whoa. Okay, hold on. You know what? Actually, I'm not going to comment on it because this entire chapter is basically about the incompetence of modern day Hydra. So we'll get commentary on some of this stuff. When they stepped on, the doors closed without their prompt. Not that they could make it. The thing had no buttons, and it started to descend. People could still find this by accident, couldn't they? Johnny asked. I'm gonna assume someone was being a little sloppy and left it open, she told him. Bad on them. The doors opened again to a dark room. Natasha pulled out her gun before she stepped out. As soon as her foot hit the floor, lights in the ceiling flickered on. The room was filled with rows upon rows of machinery that looked like it was made before she was born. In the center of the room was a set of 3 large monitors. A camera sat atop the central one. Something's on in here, Clint said, catching a low hum vibrating through the wall. I think it's coming from that, Johnny said as he pointed toward the 3 monitors. When they moved to take a closer look, they saw that it was the middle one. There was a green cursor blinking on the screen. The sound of the computerized voice caught them all off guard. Initiate system? It asked. Natasha tentatively reached for the dusty keyboard, already spotty from being used recently, and typed in yes. All of the surrounding machines whirred to life in response. The camera began to move of its own accord as the distorted image of a face appeared on the screen in black and white. Is this starting to sound familiar yet? Barton, Clinton Francis, born 1980. It said in a much more human voice with a German-sounding accent. The camera moved again, and this time she realized that it was looking at them, at her. Romanov, Natasha Alyanovna, born 1984. Then it moved to Johnny. Storm, Jonathan Lowell Spencer, born Storm, Jonathan Lowell Spencer, born 1994. What is this? Clint asked, staring at the screen in bewilderment. Maybe it's some kind of recording, she started. I am not a recording, Fraulein, the computer said firmly. I may not be the man I once was, but I am. One of the other screens cropped to life, and a grainy picture appeared on it. Natasha recognized the little man, and the face staring at them from the other screen wore the same round-framed glasses. Natasha shook her head. There's no way. You know this thing? Johnny asked her. Arnim Zola was a German scientist who worked with the Red Skull during World War II, but he died ages ago. First correction, I am Swiss, and second, look around you. I have never been more alive. Science could not save my body, but my mind was worth saving. You are standing in my brain. Natasha felt her stomach turn a little bit. So, as you can see here, for those of you who actually have played the game, I replaced the events of the actual level with not a ripoff, but a reappropriation of the scene from Captain America: The Winter Soldier when they find Arnim Zola beneath a bunker at the training camp where Steve trained way back during World War II before he went and got the serum. But can we talk about the fact that Natasha apparently couldn't recognize the Hydra symbol like right off the bat, but she sees Arnim Zola and is like, what? I know who this is. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Like, how do you forget what the Hydra symbol looks like when you work for S.H.I.E.L.D.? I just don't get that. What the hell are you doing beneath the Empire State Building? Clint asked him. It is simple, Agent Barton. No one would suspect it. You did not suspect it, not until you saw for yourself. A place where no one could find us. Us? Johnny repeated. Hydra, Natasha answered. They really are still kicking around. Cut off one head, two more will take its place, Sola recited. We are still here, and we have been closer than you think. You know this well, Agent Romanoff. Let's cut to the chase. Where's the arc reactor, and what do you need it for? Tell us and maybe I won't have Johnny torch you, Clint threatened. I don't need the arc reactor for anything, Zola admitted. You did not come here looking for me. We all know this. Then where's Loki? Natasha asked. Where indeed? The device you seek is through that door, he said, and a light flickered on over a door at the other side of the room. Johnny took one look between it and the computer, and then he raced to it. Johnny, wait, she called, and then followed him. He reached it before she could reach him and opened it. There was a huge room spread out below them, with the machine right in the middle, huge and bursting with blue light. She only just saw the shadow before it disappeared, and then there was a bright flash before the room went dark. You didn't let me finish, Zola said behind them. The man you want is not here. He is already gone to another place in another world. Natasha turned back to Clint. He was stalling. You are finally starting to get it. Oh my god, what an asshole. What an asshole, right? Johnny strode back to the middle of the room and glared at the computer screens. Get this. He snapped his fingers and both of his hands were swallowed with bright orange flame. That will not be necessary, Mr. Storm. Destruction has already been arranged. An alarm started to blare, and then all the lights turned red, even the ones on the computer. It seems you are out of time. There was a bang as one of the data banks exploded, and then another, faster and faster, until there was a wall of fire coming toward them. Come on! Johnny and Clint ran in her direction while she held the door open, but the fire was faster and began to surround them. The computers closest to her exploded 3 at one time, and the force of the blow pushed her backwards, and she fell to the floor. Okay, just too many ants. She lost sight of them as the door started to close, but then, at the last moment, they both came barreling through. She had to roll out of the way to miss them. Johnny was all aflame. Clint was just lying on his back, his chest heaving. She scrambled to her knees. Are you okay? I'm good, Johnny said, shaking the fire off of himself. I think he got burned. It's only a flesh wound, Clint groaned out. Natasha gave him an exasperated look. No, I was serious. That wasn't a bad choice of words. It's my leg. What? Natasha moved and lifted his foot, and he hissed in pain. His pant leg was dark with blood. When she rolled it up, she saw a huge gash from the base of his ankle and stretching up his calf. Flesh wound my ass, Clint. This thing is huge. We have to take care of this before we can go anywhere. Oh, God, no. Okay, let me pause before we get to this part, because I cannot stand this character we're about to see. It's funny. To me, anyway. So, what I will say is that while this chapter being the way it is inconsistent with some of the shit that happens in other parts of the story, namely the Oscorp chapter, because the take on, I forgot the name of the side level, but the Fred Dukes thing, that's actually a quote-unquote more realistic take on what happened in the game as well. Especially because originally that had nothing to do with Clint and Natasha. It was Jean and Wolverine. Hence why she mentioned Logan in that chapter. It was sort of a reference to the actual events of the game. So even though this is inconsistent with some of the other stuff that happened, like Sand Central Station is completely like, why? That would not have happened in a quote-unquote realistic MCU type world, you know? As well, the shit that happened at Oscorp in the unedited chapter is completely like nonsensical. But for what it is, this totally makes sense. Like, I totally believe that this would happen. It's a little bit like weird that if someone is, like Natasha said, sloppy, they could walk in and then end up in a Hydra base by accident. But for what it is, it works, I think. And the point is that the fact that this Hydra base was really easy to find in the end is at least lampshaded by the story. Like, it's not mentioned. It's not like, oh my god, I can't believe Hydra pulled this off. Like, we'll see in chapter 6 next episode that this is something that the characters constantly, like, point out as a way to show that Hydra really isn't the way that it used to be anymore. But anyway, we'll see a little bit more of that in this chapter, so let's keep going. But you won't be going anywhere. She looked up and was met by the sight of a man in a black mask and goggles. Who the hell are you? She asked. A lot of cursing in this fic based off of Lego Marvel Superheroes, an E-rated game. She tapped her wrists against each other and the edges of her gauntlets began to glow blue. Mad Dog, he said menacingly. That's a stupid name. She jumped to her feet and grabbed him around the neck. He convulsed as the widow's bite sent volts of electricity through his body. When she let go of him, he tumbled down the stairs until he fell flat on a landing. For all the reputation you have, no one ever expects that. Ah! She turned around as Clint was yelling and saw Johnny's hands at his legs glowing. "What are you doing?" he asked, eyes wide. "Cauterizing your wound," Johnny told him. "We didn't have any bandages. You were bleeding everywhere." Johnny removed his hands and Clint rolled over onto his side. Jesus, I feel like I'm living in the Middle Ages. She moved back to help him to his feet. When Clint put weight on his leg, it didn't hold. Mad Dog, quote unquote. I can't deal with the name. I hate it. Moaned from the landing as she started to Mad Dog moaned from the landing as he started to come to. "Go," Johnny said. "I got him." She strode down the stairs and put a foot to his chest. "Where's the exit?" "You torched the exit," he choked out. "I highly doubt you planned on sitting down here and starving to death if that thing blew up. Now tell me." She crouched down and put a hand to his neck again. "How do we get out of here?" "You don't. I already told you, you aren't going anywhere." She ripped off his his one goggle. She ripped off his goggles and mask and put her hand over his chapped lips. "It hurts more if I do it from here." "What the fuck? Stop it!" She moved her hand back to his neck and kept her grip firm. "You see that room over there?" he said, pointing weakly to a panel of large windows across the space. "There's an elevator that goes back upstairs. Good luck trying to get in there." "Why?" "It's locked. Even I can't open it." She lifted her foot from him and then punched him in the face. He slumped back down, unconscious. "There's an elevator over there," she said, turning back to Clint and Johnny. "But apparently the door to get into that room is locked. We'll see about that. Come on." Oh boy, Codebreaker Natasha's coming back. She helped with Clint as they moved down the stairs into the main floor. The portal was even bigger from down there. "You don't think we'd be able to turn it back on, do you?" Johnny asked as they passed by. Its huge walls towered over them. "Maybe follow him?" Clint shook his head. "Even if we could, we don't know how. We never learned how to use the cube that way. And we are woefully unequipped to battle gods at the moment," she added. "He's not a god," Johnny scoffed as they started to haul Clint up another set of stairs. "He's just a weird guy in a weird hat with a bag of party tricks." "You're underestimating him," Natasha replied. "You're underestimating yourselves." Clint and Natasha both looked at him with surprise. "What's with the sudden sentiment, little Steve?" "Whatever." He looked at Natasha. "Can you open the door, please?" So, I like Johnny. He's funny. It's kind of like in the way that I like Spider-Man in this story. Great kid, hilarious. Johnny, however, feels like I kind of like plucked him out of like a 90s movie and put him into this. I think it's because he keeps saying whatever. Giving him sort of like a Clueless style catchphrase is kind of like, not dated, but dated. Which is hilarious because in this story, Johnny isn't even like really a kid. This takes place in 2000, so he's like 18, I think, when this story takes place. Him and Spider-Man are like around the same age, I think. I think Spider-Man's like slightly older, but Johnny's not that young. So, but anyway. The door was big and gray, with heavy metal bars that crossed over it. There was a panel between them with something that looked like a camera. "What is this?" Natasha asked, half to herself. When it lit up with a green light, she tensed. "You two, move back." "What? Why?" Johnny asked, though he did as he was told. Natasha pushed the button for the cloaking device. The light stayed green, though nothing happened. "I thought green was a good thing." "If it stays green," she said, "and they don't always stay green." She kneeled down in front of the door, removed one of her gloves, and placed the hand to the panel. It was metal too, cold to the touch. She replaced the glove and turned on the magnets. Pulling it off took more effort than the covers an Oscorp had. Afterward, she stared into a box full of assorted wires. "Can't you just unplug it?" Johnny asked. "No," she and Clint answered at the same time. "Whoa, okay, just asking." "Powering it down could leave it locked," she explained. "I need to figure out how to disarm it." She ran her hands over the wires lightly. "Green and black," she muttered under her breath. "Green and black. What to do with these?" The light was green and the metal bars covering the door were dark, almost black. The panel in that generator room at Oscorp worked something like that, but that needed to be color-coded so any maintenance worker could use it. Who would have access to this besides the people who used it and the ones who designed it? Agent Romanoff? Give her a minute. Speaking of design, there were more wires than there were mechanisms on this thing, which meant that they probably didn't all power the same things. So it was probably just one, maybe two. It was almost like they'd anticipated that someone might try to break into it. Actually, that was probably exactly what it was. Mad Dog seemed to have regained his feet. "How the hell did you do that?" "Kindly pretend you don't exist," Clint said back. Labels would have been nice. The one at Oscorp had labels, but again, ease of access for the workers. If it did have them, they'd be the opposite. Complicated. Probably in some type of code. Wait a moment. I couldn't even get that close to it. You. Both Clint and Johnny gave a start when she started talking again. Your bosses ever give you your orders in code? Why would I tell you that? He said back. She glared at him. Because you just got over being bit. Do you really want to get burned? Johnny caught her drift and snapped his fingers. What little confidence Mad Dog might have had faltered at the sight of the flame in his hand. I'll tell you, but only if you take me with you if you get out of here. You do realize that if you leave with us, you're going to get arrested, right? Clint told him. He shrugged. Well, it's either that or getting left down here and starving to death, like she said. Fine, Natasha declared. Tell me. It's Braille. Natasha rolled her eyes. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. He shuddered a bit. If there's anyone I'm kidding, it's not you. She felt the sides of the panel, but they were smooth, unmarked. But where else could they? Oh, of course. She plunged her hands into the wires until she touched the back. The raised bumps of the words met her fingers, and she closed her eyes so she could visualize them in her head. LB31. More code, but this one was easy to crack. She moved her hand to the left side of the box and counted down the black wires to 31. She tugged at it, but it didn't come free. She slid her hand along it to the other side, which did. The metal bars slid into the walls, and the door began to swing open slowly. Finally, Johnny sighed out. She got to her feet. Make it seem hard to hide how easy it is, she said, turning off the cloaking device. That's actually pretty clever. The lights clicked on when she stepped inside. The room looked like a lounge with furniture upholstered in bright red silk. The walls were the same shade, covered in golden filigree. She immediately started to look for something like the button in the mural in the lobby until something else caught her eye. A small black filing cabinet pushed up against the opposite wall. Mad Dog came up to the wall in her place and ran his hands across the elaborate designs while muttering under his breath, which caused Johnny to jump. Jeez, I forgot about him already. Mad Dog shot him a look. Sorry, this is so funny. I think the reason why the Mad Dog thing, and I can say this because we never got to actually reveal this, the Mad Dog thing is funny because this character is supposed to be Grant Ward from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So I just keep imagining Grant doing all this stuff in the characters. Like, he's just like a butt monkey here, and I love it. Natasha pulled at one of the drawer handles, but it didn't open. She wouldn't be able to do the magnets to pull it open, but maybe she could do something about that lock. What is she doing? Mad Dog asked. Mind your business, she said back. She put a thumb to the lock and her ear against the door. She heard the mechanism clinking as she moved her finger up slightly, and then she twisted her hand. It turned and actually unlocked. She slid the drawer open with ease. There were two folders, each labeled with a name, Shield and Roxxon. The first one caught her by surprise and worried her. Hey, Mad Dog, she said as she pulled them out. You know anything about this? She showed him the Shield label and he bit his lip. My boss isn't going to want me to talk about that. Well, my boss isn't going to give you much choice. She got back to her feet and kicked the drawer closed. So if you were opening that door, I suggest you continue, or we can start the interrogation now. He looked at her nervously and pressed his hand over a flower in the lower right corner. The wall began to recede and slide sideways. Johnny shook his head. You are in so much trouble, dude. The elevator deposited them on the ground floor, in a room hidden between two others, accessible by yet another wall panel behind the desk of an office. Natasha gave Clint the files as Johnny let him go. She unholstered her gun and put her back to the door. It's probably better if you stand back, Clint said. He leaned back against the desk before pulling out a knife. Mad Dog looked him up and down. You can't even walk. This knife is for you. He threw it up in the air and the blade glinted in the light. Don't try anything. So, just to note real quick, going back to the beginning of the chapter when the guy comes to the door and is like, oh, we're closed. How? The Empire State Building has real offices in it. It's not just like an attraction people go to. So how did they manage to close down the entire building? Like, did they just disrupt all of the business going on inside of the building and just like, okay, you all need to leave now? This is where I think the issue with the Hydra base's elevator being hidden in the mural becomes sort of an issue. Because it's almost too incompetent. At the same time, if this chapter had just like taken place at night, it would have worked better, I think. And so instead of it being like, oh, we're closed today, it would have just been closed because no one's at work anymore and everyone has off at night except for the guards. Anyway, Natasha shook her head. Johnny, cover me. She reached back and pushed down the doorknob slowly and then whipped open the door. There was someone there, just as she suspected. She grabbed him by the wrist and disarmed him. The gun fell to the floor with a clatter. Johnny moved and took care of the other two. She punched him square in the face and then again, and then she forced him down by the shoulder and kneed him in the stomach. The guard, not... Because I realize that the way that that's written, it makes it sound like it's talking about Johnny, but clearly not. A bullet pinged off of the marble as another came and engaged her. She slammed the guy in the head with the butt of her gun, twisted his arm behind his back, and then kicked him to the ground. She crushed one of his ankles with the heel of her boot. She kicked him in the face, and then his head flopped to the ground. There were scorch marks at the other end of the hall, though Johnny wasn't there. She went back and got Clint and Mad Dog. "Johnny," she said as she helped him out. Him being Clint. She kicked the guns on the floor away as they moved down the hall. "Hey," he shouted back, "your folks are here." When he came back, he was followed by Coulson and several other agents. Coulson's just in every single chapter here, no matter what happens. Again, I do wonder how come Coulson is allowed to just like run around and constantly be at places. And I know this is in the game too. Coulson does show up like in the cutscenes between like basically every level. But like he literally apparently had just been out of the helicarrier for most of the day in the previous chapters. But like all the other people get to go home. I'm confusioned. Anyway, "Just in time," she said. "I didn't want to make Agent Barton try to climb out of a window." "How bad is it?" Coulson asked. "I've got a laceration on my calf. It's fairly deep." Natasha shot him a look. "Very deep," he revised. "It's been cauterized, but I still lost a lot of blood." He let out a sigh as two other agents came and took him from her. "He's doing better than he should be," Coulson said as they led Clint away. "He's tough," she said as she pushed the files into his hands. "I know," he agreed. "What are these?" he asked once he saw the files. He finally caught sight of Mad Dog as Natasha pulled a pair of handcuffs off the waist of another agent and slapped them on his wrists. "And who is that?" "Objects of interest," she started, pulling him down the hall behind her as she walked with Coulson. Director Fury was right about the portal. There was a diversion in place to stall us while Loki got away, and this portal seemed to have a one-time use, like the one in New Mexico, Coulson said. "Exactly, but not as destructive, at least not on this end. I need to speak to Fury about those ASAP," she said, nodding toward the folders. "I have reason to believe they may pose a threat to the agency." "And him?" "Mr. Mad Dog here is going to tell us about them." Coulson gave her a look and she shrugged and rolled her eyes. "Make sure someone gets the car. We promised Tony we would bring it back." They'd finally made it to the lobby when he stopped to take the keys out of her hands. "Can do." Sir?" They looked up and saw Agent Wise staring back at them from the door. "Sir, you're going to want to see this." Natasha pushed Mad Dog off on another agent before following after him. The sky was curiously gray when they got outside, but she soon saw why. Two huge wavering beams of light shot down from the clouds to a spot on the other end of the city. "Sir, the torch flew off when he saw it," she told them. "I think he's gone down there." "Contact Fury," Phil said. "Make sure he's seeing this." Natasha spoke without turning away from it. "Looks like Big Brother's finally heard the news." And that's the end of that chapter. All right, here's something that might shock you all. I actually like that. This is easily the best chapter that we've read so far. Like, oh my god, by a mile. I think what it is a combination of changing the events so that they make more sense, and the fact that the events actually do make more sense. Plus, I feel like in this chapter, all the extra dialogue didn't feel useless. The part where Natasha was analyzing the lock and undoing it was a little bit much, but it made sense. But I feel like this was a better use of her analyzing and lock breaking, I guess you want to call it, skills to do something than the other time we saw it in the unedited chapters anyway. Yeah, I actually really liked this a lot. It was like entertaining, the shit made sense, everything like kind of came together in a way that made sense. There were a few things that were kind of like eyebrow raising, like the fact that they couldn't hear the portal when Loki leave, like that was a little bit weird. And again, Hydra's incompetence, but again, that was written into the story. So I liked it. I wish the writing was better, almost. Actually, no, I do, because like the fight scenes were very like underwhelming. It was very much like she punches him and he punches her and she punches, which as we saw from Batman, not super a fan of that. But for what it is, this I think easily is one of the better chapters that we've read so far. I think this chapter being as long as it is, it actually merits its length because like chapter 3 is another example of like the event of chapter 3, I think for the most part makes sense. Again, there are a few things in it that bother me, but the part where they escape through the storm drains, number one, the logistics of that are kind of weird, but it also feels like a super extended sequence for them to just walk out of the drains. That shouldn't be that long. It feels like I was just padding the chapter, you know? But in this one, it feels like this chapter should be that long because all of this stuff needs to happen for them to like get into it, find out what's happening, and then get out of it, you know? But yeah. So I'm gonna end it here. I'll be reading what there is of chapter 6 next episode, as well as telling you guys how the story was supposed to end and what was supposed to happen in the sequel, and giving my final thoughts on this. So I will see you for that. If you like this episode, like it on the YouTubes and subscribe to the channel so you can catch the next one, or just be alerted to whatever new videos will be coming out whenever you subscribe. You can also go back and watch my backlog. That would help me quite a bit. And again, I will see you next episode. Bye!